Even though the legions are what come to mind when we think of Rome's military prowess, the Roman navy was essential to the establishment and upkeep of the Roman Empire. The Roman navy, although less well known than the legions, played a crucial part in establishing and extending ancient Rome's strength and influence. The Roman fleet was essential in preserving Rome's supremacy of the Mediterranean and other seas, comparable to the Georgian navy that ensured British dominance over the world's oceans by the late 18th century. Fleets of large and small warships patrolled the waters on rivers and the oceans, removing hostile threats and ensuring the safety of trade and passenger routes. The Roman fleet was the largest navy that had ever existed at its height of power, employing tens of thousands of sailors. However, the Romans were not an early maritime powerhouse. The Roman navy wouldn't exist until after a brutal and bloody war with a superior enemy. It is a fascinating tale, much like any Genesis story. The dawn of the Roman navy. The story of the Roman navy begins in the 3rd century BC, during one of the most bloody and costly conflicts in the Mediterranean Sea. Carthage was the dominant naval power in the western Mediterranean at the time. This powerful North African state established colonies in Spain, Sardinia, and Sicily. When Carthage's possessions on Sicily were threatened by a rising power from Italy, the Roman Republic, it dispatched a massive fleet to deal with the problem. As a result, the First Punic War began. Rome had a vastly inferior naval force and lacked seaborne combat experience at the start of the war. However, things were about to change. The Carthaginian misfortune turned out to be a stroke of luck for the Republic, according to historian Polybius, who left us a detailed account of the war. The Romans began a large building program in 260 BC, using a shipwrecked enemy's boat as a template. Rome built its first significant navy in just 60 days, consisting of 100 large quinquiremes and 20 smaller triremes. Carthage's superior seamanship and sheer size, over 300 ships, could not be matched. Thus, the Roman navy was baptized in fire and suffered its first defeat at the Battle of the Lipari Islands. The Romans had enough of money to rebuild their fleet, but they needed seasoned captains and sailors. Galley crews were expensive and competent freemen, not slaves as is commonly believed. Rome was forced to instruct its army recruits in basic rowing and maneuvering aboard shore-based mock-up wooden ships. The clumsily gathered and trained crew, however, stood no chance against the more seasoned Carthaginian opponents. Because of this, enemy ships continued to easily sail past Roman warships, breaking their oars in the process, leaving the target ship exposed and disabled. The assailant would then ram the defenseless boat and abandon it to sink. The corvus was created by Roman engineers to level the playing field. It was basically a wooden boarding ramp with a large metal spike at the bottom. When you looked at this clever contraption, the corvus would be lowered, binding the two ships together after the Roman cruiser rammed an adversary's hull, converting the maritime conflict into a land conflict. Rome was particularly skilled in close-quarters infantry fighting. At the Battle of Mylae in 260 BC, when the Romans caught the Carthaginians off guard and boarded and sank or captured the enemy's ships, these new strategies began to bear fruit. The Battle of Cape Ecnomus took place in 256 BC, and the Romans won decisively. 300 Roman ships destroyed a 350-ship Carthaginian fleet in one of the biggest naval battles in history, sinking 30 and capturing 64 hostile warships. Roman naval losses during the First Punic War were exceptionally severe, notwithstanding their naval victories. 600 warships, more than 1,000 transports, and more than 400,000 soldiers were all lost by Rome. Carthage, however, was not the guilty party. Due to the corvus's weight and position in the bow, which made ships unstable in heavy seas, the majority of casualties were caused by the Roman practice of sailing in bad weather. A severe storm that struck a Roman invasion fleet a year after Ecnomus sank 384 ships. This was also the corvus' final known use before being replaced by a more compact gangplank. The Romans continued despite suffering heavy losses, replacing damaged ships and hiring new men. The First Punic War came to an end in 241 BC when the Roman navy decisively defeated the enemy in the Battle of œgātes, forcing Carthage to request peace. Even though there would be 2 more battles with Carthage, the strength of the Roman navy's success meant that Hannibal had to conquer Italy on foot. The surviving Carthaginian fleet did not dare to oppose the Roman navy's hegemony. Rome looked east after establishing control over the western Mediterranean. When war with the Seleucid Empire broke out in 192 BC, Lucius Scipio, the brother of illustrious General Scipio Africanus, marched his army across land while the navy supported him. Transporting the Roman army by water was a difficult undertaking because the Seleucids still had a sizable navy despite being barely a shell of their once formidable Hellenistic empire. But at the Battle of Myonnesus in 190 BC, Roman warships routed the Seleucid navy. The Seleucid Empire was eliminated off the map a few weeks later after the victory at Magnesia. The entire Mediterranean was now under the control of the Romans. With respect to substantial maritime power, only the Roman ally Rhodes and Ptolemaic Egypt, which was by then in decline, remained. Despite earlier maritime successes and the navy's contribution to the establishment and growth of the Roman Republic, the fleet remained subordinate to the Roman land forces. One of the most thorough procedures of naval disarmament in history resulted from this. As a result, the Roman navy could not protect vital trade routes and port cities from a new menace. By 102 BC, more than 1,000 pirate ships preyed on the vulnerable Mediterranean shipping lanes. More than 400 coastal towns had been sacked, their populations sold at Roman slave markets. Even Rome, the very center of the Republic, was not spared. Pirates threatened vital grain imports, and in 67 BC, they came to the very doorstep of the capital, raiding the harbor of Ostia. It was a step too far. The same year, the Senate sent Pompey the Great to eradicate the outlaws. He fulfilled his task splendidly. Marshalling vast resources, Pompey assembled a large fleet and systematically targeted pirate coastal strongholds. Within a year, the Mediterranean Sea was free of the pirate scourge. Thousands died in the naval blitzkrieg, and thousands more were crucified or sold to slavery. However, violence was not the key to Pompey's success in quelling the inner sea. Numerous pirates received pardons, were relocated to interior regions, and were granted land to farm. This then helped Rome's economy. Fewer pirates were permitted to operate, but they worked for the Republic, providing Rome with a regular supply of slave labor. Pompey perished in one of the numerous civil wars that tore the Roman Republic apart, a few decades after he rid the Mediterranean of piracy. The navy had to combat fellow Romans rather than an external enemy. The last fleet of pirates, led by none other than Sextus Pompey, the son of Pompey the Great, was routed in 36 BC by Agrippa, the admiral in charge of Octavian's naval force. In 31 BC, the famous Battle of Actium took place between the naval forces of Octavian and Mark Antony. Once again, Agrippa won the day, his smaller warships outmaneuvering and immobilizing Antony's large quinquiremes. Actium also signaled the last major naval battle in the Mediterranean, as the victory led to the downfall of Ptolemaic Egypt and the establishment of the Roman Empire. The Roman navy now commanded the waves in the Mediterranean Sea, which had the appearance of a lake. Octavian, later Emperor Augustus, founded the Roman imperial navy with two major fleet commands, Classis Praetoria Missinensis at Misenum on the Gulf of Naples and Classis Praetoria Ravennatus at Ravenna in the northern Adriatic. This was done in recognition of the importance of the warships in policing the inner sea and patrolling trade routes. The duty of both fleets was to guard Italy and its profitable trade routes that delivered essential products like grain. Roman vessels continued to patrol the whole Mediterranean from two more naval sites, one in Alexandria and the other in Forum Iulii, modern-day Frejus. The navy was further developed by Augustus' successors, who established fleet commanders in the Atlantic, English Channel, Black Sea, and on the Great Danube, Rhine, and Euphrates rivers. The Red Sea also had its own navy for a brief time, which was helpful to Roman trade with the East. Throughout the imperial era, the navy remained beneath the army. Fleets ferried troops, supported the legions logistically, and kept marines on duty to protect the rivers and coastlines. It's interesting to note that sailors did not consider themselves to be soldiers. This may be seen in the gravestone inscriptions where sailors opted to refer to themselves as legionaries. The high-ranking positions were held by members of the Roman elites, whereas sailors, who primarily came from seafaring peoples in the eastern Mediterranean, belonged to the lowest level of society. The Roman navy still ruled the Mediterranean for centuries after Augustus founded the empire. The only danger at the time that was significant was the Gothic raids on the coastal cities of Asia Minor in the middle of the 3rd century CE. However, the Roman navy didn't actually face any serious rivals. The fleets of Emperors Constantine I and Licinius engaged in the only significant maritime conflict with exclusively Roman soldiers in 324 CE. But a century later, everything was very different. The Vandals had conquered North Africa by the end of the 5th century, and the Roman West had been replaced by the successor kingdoms of the barbarians. The remaining portion of the empire, often known as the Byzantine Empire, migrated to the east after the Emperor Justinian's brief reconquest of the western Mediterranean in the 6th century. The Byzantine navy, which was now headquartered in Constantinople, would contribute far more to state defense than it had in the past. Not only were drahman war galleys and the renowned covert weapon Greek fire essential for defending the empire's distant conquests around the Mediterranean basin, but they were also crucial for thwarting seaborne assaults against Constantinople itself. The navy's fate reflected the fate of the empire. The rise of the maritime republics of Venice and Genoa and the weakening of the empire's power from the 11th century onwards resulted in the decline of the imperial navy. Then, in 1204, the Fourth Crusade captured and sacked Constantinople, shattering the remnants of the empire's naval power. By the mid-14th century, the mighty Roman navy, which once ruled the Mediterranean, was now only a shadow of its former self. Finally, in 1453, Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Turks, who destroyed the last vestiges of the Roman Empire and its navy.